Muy buenos días. Siendo las 9 de la mañana, comenzamos la transmisión de nuestro webinar. Muchas gracias por su puntual conexión. Mi nombre es Ricardo Paredes y seré su moderador en el evento del día de hoy. A nombre del Programa Global de Calidad y Estándares y el Programa de Alianza para Países, ambos de UNIDO, y su proyecto en el Perú, Fortaleciendo la Calidad en Café y Cacao en el Perú, les doy la bienvenida a este webinar sobre la tecnología blockchain para cadenas de valor, una introducción. Tenemos una jornada bastante interesante y yo diría que bastante valiosa para todos los participantes, por lo cual procederé directamente a brindar instrucciones para ayudar en el desarrollo de este evento. En esta oportunidad, este evento será en el idioma inglés, pero contaremos con traducción simultánea, la cual es posible de aplicar en la plataforma Zoom, que ustedes están utilizando en este momento. Entonces voy a tomarme unos minutos para explicarles cómo activar y utilizar de manera adecuada esta función del Zoom, tanto si utilizan una computadora de escritorio como si utilizan un smartphone. Entonces los invito a revisar su pantalla en la parte de abajo y que en la barra de controles identifiquen el botón de interpretación, que le hagan clic y ahí van a ver un menú desplegable. Ahí van a ver la opción de los idiomas que hay. En esta oportunidad solamente van a poder escoger o inglés o español. Entonces, a las personas que no entienden bien el inglés o prefieren no arriesgarse a perder alguna parte de la exposición, les recomendamos que hagan clic en la versión de español y también tienen otra opción adicional. Si desean escuchar la versión original en inglés en menor volumen, o se podría decir como sombra, pueden mantener la configuración como está. Pero si desean solamente escuchar la versión en español, ponen que poner en silencio el audio original, ¿no? Entonces es una decisión que ustedes tienen que tomar en estos momentos. Si están en smartphone, ahí tienen que también identificar la barra de herramientas, identificar los 3 botones para que puedan ver más opciones en el menú y también tiene que hacer clic en el botón de interpretación de idiomas. Y también van a ver solamente la opción de inglés o español. Ustedes tienen que elegir cuál prefieren y también tienen que elegir si es que prefieren solamente escuchar español o también escuchar en inglés, pero en un menor volumen y en la sombra, se podría decir, ¿no? Y con eso ya estamos configurados para poder escuchar adecuadamente este evento. Finalmente, otras instrucciones muy importantes. En la parte inferior también, en este evento, la participación de los asistentes se podrá hacer a través de la sección preguntas y respuestas, las cuales se responderán al final de la presentación. No va a haber participación del público en vivo, por lo que el chat va a estar desactivado. También durante el desarrollo de la conferencia se llevarán a cabo encuestas para enriquecer la experiencia, para las cuales agradeceremos su muy pronta respuesta. Finalmente, les presento el programa del día de hoy. Comenzaremos este evento en estos momentos con las palabras iniciales del señor Juan Pablo Dávila, quien es Project Manager del proyecto Perú, y hablará en representación de UNIDO. Luego tenemos las exposiciones de 3 distinguidas consultoras y expertas en este tema. La señora Leontien Hasselman, que es CEO de la empresa Supply Chain Information Management. La señora también Irene y finalmente Nithya Suri, también consultora. Luego tendremos una sección de preguntas y respuestas y cerraremos el evento con las palabras de cierre del señor Juan Pablo Dávila, nuevamente de UNIDO. Sin más preámbulo, le doy la palabra a Juan Pablo Dávila.
Muchas gracias, Ricardo. Buenos días a todo mundo. Muchas gracias por tomarse el tiempo de participar en este webinar sobre blockchain. Uno de los principales objetivos de la Organización de Naciones Unidas para el Desarrollo Industrial es la promoción de tecnologías, la promoción de innovación, y bajo el Directorado de Tecnología y Agroindustria es donde el Programa Global de Normas se hospeda, y como parte de este esfuerzo de promocionar nuevas tecnologías, promocionar lo que es la cuarta revolución industrial, nos complace hacer este webinar sobre blockchain, una introducción. Nuestra experiencia es, como ustedes deben de saber, blockchain es una nueva tecnología. Estamos explorando, tenemos una cierta experiencia en una metodología que se explicará durante esta presentación, y nos complace informar de que estamos completamente comprometidos en ayudar a los países miembros de la UNIDO en explorar y tomar mejores decisiones para la adopción de nuevas tecnologías en esta cuarta revolución industrial. Sin más por el momento, nuevamente muchas gracias, buenos días y espero que disfruten este webinar.
Muchas gracias, Juan Pablo. Muchas gracias, Juan Pablo. También, nuevamente, sin mayor preámbulo, le doy la palabra. Primero, permítame cambiar de presentación. Le doy la palabra al equipo de SIM para que pueda iniciar la presentación y hacer la conferencia. Muy buenos días. Leontien, I give you the floor.
Yeah, good morning to you all. It's afternoon. Thank you very much, Ricardo, and welcome everybody to this webinar. I will be the first presenter. Very honored to be the presenter here today. I have two other people from our company who will give a presentation today. Myself, I am Leontien Hasselman, and I'm the CEO of SIM Supply Chain. I also have with me Irene Beers. She is the head of our knowledge center. And I have Nithya, Suri, who's our consultant working in our knowledge center. Maybe to start first with what type of company we are. We're called SIM, Supply Chain Information Management. And we are an organization, we are existing for 11 years now, with our sole purpose is to visualize food supply chains all the way from the consumer to primary production, or to maybe even to animal feed. And we have been doing that for 11 years. We find out where products are made and under which circumstances. We work for many large food retailers and traders and producers in Northwest Europe. The likes of maybe that you know of an Ahold Delhaize or a Coop in Switzerland or Axfood in Sweden. But we visualize supply chains and map them. So we're in contact with all the producers, factories, traders, processors of food products sold in those companies. Most of the time they are the private label and fresh and ultra fresh products that we visualize, and we try to understand what the risks are in the supply chain and what the positive impact can be. What we are talking about today, the objectives of our presentation, that's the next slide, is actually twofold. We will talk about the technology of blockchain, where we have experience applying it quite extensively in the agro food supply chains. And we will also share with you our experience of a pilot project we've done this year together with UNIDO to look at what could be the added value of blockchain technology in the cocoa value chain in Ghana. The contents of the presentation, which is the next slide, I won't go into details because you will hear about this, but mainly we will talk about what is blockchain technology, and I have the honor to talk to you about that. but also what are common issues we see in food supply chains, and can technology actually bring solve such issues. We will give you examples of how blockchain has been used, and also what the methodology exactly is that UNIDO has developed to look at readiness of certain supply chains for blockchain technology. And we talk about what we've done in what we have done in Ghana, as well as the possibility to maybe look at the same for Peru. So maybe before I dive into the real hard, difficult discussion or explanation what blockchain is, we would like to know actually from what type of organization you come. And you would see actually a poll where you can choose what type of organization you come from. So you would see it in the screen now. It would be great if you could all tick box and score what type of organization you're from.
Sí, para apoyar, animamos a los participantes a responder. Por favor, les damos unos segundos adicionales para tener la opinión o la situación de la mayoría de los participantes.
Okay, I think the translation didn't work, but okay, so we see the first results come in. So it's actually a mix of organizations all through the supply chain, which is actually great. Great to see. And we have also the largest part of cooperatives and producers. So that's great. So I don't feel we have any transporters here, but let's dive into the content now. So this is interesting, I think, for many of you. If we can go to the next slide. As I talked to you about at SIM, we have mapped currently over 200,000 supply chains, and have been in contact with hundreds of thousands of suppliers anywhere in the world. And we have collected 100,000 of audit reports and certifications coming from the supply chain. So what is it that we actually do? Here you see a general supply chain. As you can see here, on one of the first projects we've done with blockchain was around the orange juice supply chain. So that, hence the oranges that I'm, the orange plantation that I have in the background, but also here the picture. What you actually see here is a general supply chain for instance, orange juice. And if we look at the work that we've do, and I think that many organizations do, is if you want to know the supply chain of a product, you start at consumer or retail or brand level, and you actually go and look back what has happened to that product in the supply chain. So this is the work which we do. An average retailer has around 14,000 products, and for each product we go all the way back like a detective to see where has that product been, what type of actors have participated in creating that product, and what type of added value did they have towards the product. So that is actually creating transparency in the supply chain, what you see. You actually try to pull a lot of information from the supply chain once the product is often already in a distribution center, already in the market. And it's almost like driving a car and looking back, what has happened to that product before? While one of the trends which you see in the current food supply chains is that everybody's looking to establish traceability, which means that data is traveling with the product through the supply chain, and every actor in the supply chain handling that product actually can see where the product has been, who has worked on it, and exactly where it comes from. Now, on average, traceability is not even 10% of the products are really traceable that end up at the consumer level. And why is that actually? Well, first of all, we have to look at what type of data is actually needs to be collected or is collected in these type of systems. So if we look at supply chains, we visualize them, and we're in contact with these actors, we collect information about the safety, food safety, product safety. We collect data about sustainability. So that can be social compliance, climate impact, water use, pesticide use, efficiency within the supply chain, quality, but also provenance. can you say that this particular product, this orange juice, actually comes from that plantation? And I think what is also new is actually collecting financial transactions. But that is something that it cannot be done by nowadays systems. So in this case, we have tried set up traceability systems 6 years ago already, but it never worked. Why didn't it work? Because in a centralized traceability system, one actor in this supply chain would own all the data. So in this case, it might be that the retailer would own a traceability system and would ask all the supply chain partners to provide information with the product and on themselves. But then only the retailer would have that specific information about the supply chain, and all the other actors would only provide information but not necessarily get information. So centralized traceability systems never really worked. And that actually changed when we started experimenting with blockchain technology. Because one of the things which we saw on these supply chains is that data is often hidden in silos. So farmers, but also processors might have a lot of data, but they're not necessarily willing to share. There's often not a lot of trust to share data. There's a lot of requests to add data with a product, but there's not a lot of trust to provide the data, what happened with it. And what we see overall in food supply chains is that they're very volatile, especially now during the COVID period, COVID-19 we see it, but also there's a lot of food fraud going on, which is a growing issue in these supply chains. So once we started experimenting with blockchain technology, we actually solved some of these problems. If we can show the next slide, because I can imagine that you would ask, okay, how can blockchain help with creating traceability? Well, you first need to understand what is blockchain. Maybe one of the easiest way to explain the technology, you see here these 3 drawings. The first one is a centralized systems. The thing that we do, if we collect data from one actor, say for a retailer or for a trader, we collect all the information from the supply chain and that actor owns it all. And he can decide if he wants to share data with anybody or with nobody. And if he decides to stop this network of data, then nobody has any access anymore. That's the most used database, centralized database way that a lot of our systems currently run. Exactly that one. The second one is a decentralized one. Actually, you have a lot of these centralized systems that are connecting together. So you call this a peer-to-peer network. There is more insight into what is happening, but nobody has a real view of the full truth. And if any of these networks within the network decide to actually step out of the network, all of that data is actually lost. And nobody can have that, and the historic data is also lost. Then the third picture actually shows a distributed network. So what is very different there is actually that every actor in such a network is connected. And every actor in a network has a copy of the database and the information. So everybody has access to the truth at the same time when it's happening. Anything registered in a database would be accessible to all parties. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody can see everything, but I will get more into detail about that. What is very important for you to understand is that actually, if there's one thing you should remember about blockchain, the first thing you should remember is probably that it democratizes the data sharing. So it's not that one party or a couple of parties only, no, everybody has the possibility to access the truth. What is also important to remember about blockchain is that it's immutable, which means that you cannot change it. Anything you save in a blockchain database, you cannot change. Immediately, a question that's always asked then is, but what if you put fraudulent data in there? Information that is not correct, a false certificate or a wrong certificate with the wrong scope. That can still happen. Only the moment that when somebody sees it in the network or somebody corrects it, everybody sees that it has happened. So the threshold to manipulate data is becoming less and less with blockchain. What's also very important is that privacy can be guaranteed. You can still add data, and you can still decide who sees what. And that's very important to distinguish blockchain technology with cryptocurrency technology. So a lot of people, when they think of blockchain, they think of Bitcoins and cryptocurrency. There, it's a public network. Anybody can access it. What you see, the type of technology used in food supply chains has nothing to do with cryptocurrency, except that it's a distributed database system, which means that it's private, a private network where you authorize people to actually, if they can see your data, yes or no. So that's very different. And it's also encrypted. So it doesn't mean that everybody can see everything what's in the database. No, you can have certain keys to decrypt the data and see them correctly. If we now go to the next slide, what does that mean for the supply chain that I just talked about? Because I said, okay, let's look at this orange juice supply chain, and I have it here again in a linear way. What is important if you set up a traceability system like that is that data, in the case if you put a blockchain system behind this, data is not owned by one actor. Actually, it's held by all of the actors in this supply chain. It's owned by everybody, but it doesn't mean that everybody has access to it. So you can still arrange and give permissions who will see what. The good thing that you have with traceability is that you actually in real time can see the product move through the supply chain. So every transaction, every step, it goes from the producer to the trader or to the processor, you can actually follow. And every time the transaction is happening, it's saved in the database and it builds a little piece of data. And we made it here visual because often in the end, the consumer or the retailer can print a QR code on the product. And from there, you can actually get all of the access to all of the information that has been added in the blockchain while the product moved to the supply chain. What is also very important, coming back to what I said, if you need to remember one thing, remember that this is about democratizing data. No partner in this network has priority. So in order to participate in such a network, everybody has, in principle, the same rights. And what you actually do is this data on food safety, on efficiency, on quality, maybe even lab results of the product, you all put that into an electronic format, which can be accessible to computers. But computers can be very advanced laptops, but it might as well be a mobile phone or a tablet. We have many examples of supply chains like this where farmers would put the first information in the blockchain via a text message or a WhatsApp message that gets saved in the blockchain. And that's when the product actually starts being tracked through the supply chain. And other actors further in the supply chain, like the transport actor or the processing plants, might have very advanced ERP systems with full-fledged interfaces connecting to the blockchain. It doesn't really matter, as long as you can digitize the information in an electronic format, you can participate in the blockchain. One of the unexpected outcomes and benefits we found actually is that why it didn't work with centralized traceability systems is because we would ask actors to use a platform. So they would have to double the information. What we have done with this blockchain is just build a highway of data, a highway of where you can put data on and connect existing systems. So all of the actors could continue to work in their own private operating systems and not have to work in a separate tool altogether. Now going back to, so what type of data do you capture then in these blockchain databases? Well, first of all, I think what is a very important one, that's the next slide, is you would put a facility organization. So every actor that has an own node in the blockchain, so to say, has a specific facility passport. So basic information on location level. That can be information, you know, it can be anywhere with GPS codes to GLN numbers or numbers that indicate what type of organization it is. But also all of the certificates on food safety, on social compliance that are important for the organization. What you also often see is that a part of that facility passport is public to show to the network, hey, this is who I am. But then only with direct business partners, other parts of the passport will be shared. That can be, for instance, number of employees, of number of workers on a farm or plantation with a contract or without the contract. And it can be also be information about future plans for improving sustainable production on a farm or in a factory or processing plant. So every actor in the passport has such a, in the network has such a facility passport. Then the other very important one, which is the next slide, is of course the product passport. And you can really think of it as a passport like a normal human passport where you put stamps in. So the moment, like I said, a product starts getting a passport in this blockchain, every actor can stamp it when the product is moving or they own it, or it's in their facility, or it's in their farm, or it's in their factory, or it's on the ship, or in the or in transport. And here you have all kinds of information that can be added on the product specifications, on the type of product, also the product related certifications, which become more and more important. So a lot of the sustainability related information where you need a chain of custody in order to have a certain sustainability logo for the consumer on there, you can track that through the product passport in such a network. Now, if we go to the next slide, you would have a product with a product passport, actors with a facility passport. And here actually you have the same supply chain I was talking about, only often now when you use a blockchain technology, this network is not necessarily linear, this supply chain. It's more of a network, what you see here, where everybody then is connected and has access to information. Now, the third thing, which is very important in blockchain technology, and that's what you see here, each of these actors have a little contract in there. And that is what you call a smart contract. So next to a product information, facility information, you collect information on the transactions. And these are collected in smart contracts. And to stay with the orange juice example, you can say, okay, if the oranges have a certain quality, if they are in these type of boxes, if they come from a farm which is Rainforest Alliance certified, and they will be in this container, then there can be an okay. The smart contract can give an okay, and the transaction can go through. And then every transaction is put as a block in the blockchain. Now, to go to the next slide, to give a little bit more insight into smart contracts. I said you could remember a couple of things about blockchain. One, it democratizes data. But two is also very important. These smart contracts you will hear much more of in the future. And what you can remember about smart contracts is actually that they're more or less, you can also say that they're more of I call them dumb contracts, because they do nothing more than just kind of put in computer code the agreements made. So a set of business rules, but then written into code. If the oranges are ripe, if they are certified, if they come from a farm which has a certification, if there's no mold on there, you can name whatever you want. You put it in a smart contract as a business rule, and that can be checked. And as that is checked, then the product can move through the supply chain. The interesting thing, of course, becomes that you can also steer ahead. So what we often have with fresh produce is that depending on, for instance, the level of pesticides, the fruit can go to one country in Europe, but they cannot go to another country. And that is something that helps also proactively shared and steered upon. What you also see is that these smart contracts are self-enforcing and self-executing. So you can put them in every step of the supply chain, and you can digitize a lot of the agreements currently that are made face-to-face or made by paper trail, or sometimes not even by trail. So you can kind of help self-executing contracts in a supply chain that really help automate and govern food production. And this is, of course, making it more efficient and provides more speed and accuracy. One of the things that we are looking into with also, for instance, Dutch bank like the Rabobank, is what you often see now is that producers are paid quite late. Sometimes they're only paid when their goods arrive at a port in the US or Europe, and then they're paid every 60 or 90 days. Well, if you can put in these smart contracts agreements, if products have been delivered according to the specifications and a payment can be issued, then you will really transform markets. And I think that's where a lot of our customers are looking into, how next to sustainability, food safety, and efficiency topics in these smart contracts, you can also put financial agreements and transactions in there. So that would be a possibility to cut a lot of cost in different steps of the supply chain. I saw there was a question coming in. I will just, I think, continue and then maybe later we have some time for those questions.
Sí, por favor, continúa y se responderán al final las preguntas.
Okay, let's do that. So that's a very important part of the smart contracts. If we can go to the next slide. So next to a product passport, a facility passport, and smart contracts, the end goal of many of the blockchains now available in the food agro sector have either focused on communicating provenance to the consumer and or creating much more efficiencies in the supply chains and less food waste and cutting cost. What's often asked is, if you put this QR code towards the consumer, can the consumer then see everything that has happened in the supply chain? No, that's definitely not the case. Actually, the most interesting part of these blockchain products and these blockchain networks is that all of the actors will sit together before products go through it and decide who can see what. Now, you can imagine that many actors in the supply chain are willing to share a lot of data with their direct business partners. So farms with cooperatives, or cooperatives with the logistic partners, or traders, importers with retailers, but not necessarily with the other ones. So you can put rules in who sees what, and you can also make exceptions. For instance, if there is an issue with the quality of a product, then, only then, all of the actors decide to give more insight into the quality checks happening through the supply chain, or the lab results at each step of the supply chain. So these are agreements that can be made, and therefore also almost all the blockchains I know in the food supply chains are private permission blockchains. So beforehand, all of the agreements are stipulated and written down in the smart contracts, and therefore also it's up to the supply chain partners to decide exactly what the consumer can see. So that's very important also to remember. And I think one of the really interesting things that we have seen with the blockchain applications that we have, is that and it's also what was unforeseen, that it's a very powerful thing to connect the consumer directly to the people who make or grow our foods. And that is something that we will show also in the examples that we will show. And I think the next slide is about what are the issues that we see in many of these supply chains that we apply blockchain technology to. And this is what Irene will take up and explain to you.
Thank you, Leontien. Yes, indeed, this slide gives kind of a summary, I think, of what you already presented about the possible issues and challenges there can be in supply chains globally, including food waste, food fraud, payments that take a lot of time and can be a big problem for producers. Of course, lack of transparency and disconnect between demand and supply. And before we go to some examples of blockchain implementation, referring to these type of issues, we would like to again do a short poll. So maybe we can go to the poll. There are 3 questions. You will see them on your screen. So I will give you a little time to fill it in, and we will come back on that at the end of the presentation to evaluate. And it's just to get a feeling of whether you recognize some of these issues and problems and challenges that can exist in supply chains.
Estimados participantes, los animamos a responder esta encuesta, que va a ser muy importante para las conclusiones del evento, y también nos dará una noción de las principales complicaciones que se identifican en las cadenas, y nos indicarán también en qué temas enfatizar los trabajos posteriores que pensamos hacer en el tema blockchain en las cadenas. Es muy importante su participación, tanto si ustedes son productores o participantes activos de la cadena, como proveedores o vendedores de suministros o transportistas u otros actores, pero también relacionados. Se los agradecemos bastante.
Sorry, I was muted. I will continue and we will come back on the results later. So this would be the first example to show you. Leontien already told you about it. It was our first blockchain implementation for orange juice from Brazil. And the problem actually was that a Dutch NGO had reported repeatedly about bad working conditions at orange farms in Brazil, the farms that produced actually for the private label orange juice products of Dutch retailers. And one of our clients, the biggest retailer in the Netherlands, they wanted to provide evidence to their consumers, to their customers, that their farms that they used for their orange juice were all Rainforest Alliance certified and did well on social compliance. So they teamed up with the bottler of the orange juice in Europe, Refresco, and the processor of the juice in Brazil, Louis Dreyfus and Company, LDC. And together they implemented blockchain technology to follow each batch of oranges from the farms to the consumer product package. The consumer can get the information on the farms by scanning a QR code on the package of the products and typing in the batch code on the products in their consumer app. And then they will see the journey of their products starting at the farm. If we go to the next slides, we have another example, which is for tilapia from Indonesia. And many people, many consumers actually think that farmed fish is bad for your health because of overuse of antibiotics, phosphates and preservatives, and that farmed fish is also bad for the ecosystem. One of the Dutch retailers decided to, together with their contract supplier of fish in the Netherlands, but also with the farm in Indonesia, together to set up a blockchain for this and to collect data on the fish, starting with the feed and the chemicals used, the environmental management of the firm, and put everything or make it all accessible to the consumer via blockchain. And that's in the same way as we saw for the orange juice. The consumer can scan a QR code, enter a code for the specific article that they bought, and they can see the specifics about the fish. We also, that's the next slide, implemented a blockchain with an international supplier of bananas, Fives, together with one of their clients, Plus, for the fair trade bananas from Colombia. and to make them into climate neutral bananas. So the first step was to calculate the carbon footprint of the bananas and to offset it. So the parties in the blockchain compensated the carbon footprint, and now they are all working to reduce their actual emissions. So the transporter Maersk is working on that, and the ripener of the bananas in the Netherlands. And this reduction of the carbon footprint is recorded on the blockchain and can be followed by the consumer. So the next example is actually one from a case from IBM. IBM Food Trust is their blockchain, is the name of their blockchain. And this was actually the first pilot they did with large international retailer Walmart. And it proved very convincingly, actually, that the benefit of blockchain when there is a food recall. Traditionally, it took more than 6 days to trace the product back to where it was made. And with blockchain, they reduced this to a mere 2.2 seconds. This allowed the retailer, Walmart, to limit the recall and thus the cost associated with it to only one single batch of products in comparison with having to take back the whole production of a week. And the last example is actually from Provenance, another supplier of supply chain transparency for tuna from Southeast Asia. And they created a blockchain that focused on labor rights violations on the fishing vessels at sea, and also on illegal fishing, which is a big problem around these areas. And they created traceability starting actually at the vessels, so not in the processing facilities, but they started on the vessels, and so it became possible to verify the actual origin and the circumstances of the workers for each individual consumer product. So if we from this, so what can be the issues in a supply chain and what can blockchain address and solve? We now go into the UNIDO methodology. This methodology is aiming to assess a specific value chain on the readiness for blockchain. So would it be the right choice? But first of all, before I go into that, it's important to state that blockchain is not an end in itself. It's always a means, an instrument to optimize the working of a supply chain. So that involves factors like trust between the supply chain actors, track and trace, ensuring that product is not tampered with, providing openness and transparency, and of course, facilitating the efficiency of transfers and trade. So the UNIDO methodology, and that's the next slide. The essence of it are 3 questions. The first is, does my industry need blockchain? The second is my industry ready to adopt blockchain? And the third one is, what would it take to implement blockchain? So if you go to the next slide, this is the methodological framework that was made for the methodology. And it exists of 3 parts: scope, score, and solution, or reporting towards a solution. And these three parts work towards the answers to the 3 questions that I just presented. They make use of research, stakeholder consultations, stakeholder visits, and the whole process is powered by a fact-finding mission on ground to collect and validate the information. So part 1, scope, is to create the basis for the assessments by doing a value chain analysis and to identify the main issues in the chain and the specific problems for the different stakeholders, including the farmers, cooperatives, traders in the country of origin, as well as the perspectives of the buyers and consumers in the export market. And this provides an answer to the question, to the first question: does this value chain has issues, problems that can be addressed by blockchain? So do we need it? The second part, score, is to assess whether the blockchain can be implemented. So zooming in on, for instance, whether the supply chain actors have access to the right infrastructure, electricity, mobile phone network, banking, you name it, and if the required data is available, and to see whether traceability to some extent is or can be created. So that's an answer to the second question. And the third part, based on parts 1 and 2, is to evaluate what it would take to implement blockchain as a solution. For example, reflecting on the question if all important stakeholders are willing to collaborate, and if they already have the right IT systems in use. So going to the next slide. The methodology starts by mapping the supply chain. So it is important to understand the role of each actor, what their activities are towards the product, their interests, and what problems they have to face. For example, regarding inventory management, fluctuating prices, but it can also be labor shortages, or for the retailer, the problem how to guarantee towards the consumer that they buy a safe and sustainable product. And the next step would be to identify other third parties that are involved in the supply chain, but in another way. For example, regulatory institutions, governments, sector organizations, and NGOs. So going to the next slide, when there is a good overview of all those stakeholders, it's important to make an analysis to decide how they should be involved in the project. And what you see here is an example of how you could do such a stakeholder mapping. We have done it like this. Identifying the key stakeholders, of course, who will be participants in the blockchain, and that will be, of course, the supply chain actors like cooperatives, farmers, traders, processors. But there will also be a broader group of stakeholders, and they can act as a soundboard for the project, a kind of advisory group, because they have a lot of insights and knowledge, like NGOs, trade unions, or because they can influence other parties or the public. Central in this phase is to explore with all stakeholders together the question, what's in it for me? Can blockchain possibly address the problems of the different participants? So the next, yes, thank you. The next step would be to actually visit the stakeholders and to check their situation and their operations on 7 parameters. Per parameter, there are a number of indicators that we will use as a kind of questionnaire during the visit. I will go through the parameters one by one. Infrastructure at the top will, for example, check what distance a farmer is from the nearest bank, or whether there is telephone and internet coverage in the rural areas. The second one, data availability, looks at whether information is recorded, for example, on transactions, on the identity of the actors, and how it is stored, for example, on paper or digital. IT savviness looks at the IT systems that are used, but also how the experiences of actors to use the IT systems, and if they are willing to do it. Traceability refers to what actor can the products be traced back, and are records kept per batch, and what happens with this information if batches are mixed. The fifth one, transparency, is about whether it is clear and known who is each actor in the supply chain. And this might be difficult, for example, if it is a value chain with lots of smallholder farmers that are not organized in a cooperative. Also related to transparency is whether they have access to information on the market, and if there are possibilities to share information between the actors. The parameter transactions assesses aspects like prices, if they are stable or volatile, regulated. Also, if contracts are used, if payments are done in cash or digital. And last of all, sustainability. And this is initially assessed by looking at the certifications, or whether good agricultural practices programs are in place, GAP programs, or if there are any sector or government initiatives aiming at environmental protection, for example, better working conditions or availability of schools. So with these 7 parameters, we collect, or a lot of information is collected on ground. And if you go to the next slide, you will see an impression, bit simplified impression of how this information can be aggregated into scorecards per actors, but also on the whole. And this will give an idea of what problems there might be regarding the need for blockchain, but also regarding the expected benefits and the readiness of the actors to do that. So from this analysis, recommendations can be formulated for the next steps. And to give an example of how this was implemented, the pilot in Ghana, my colleague Nithya will now take over.
Hello, good afternoon. As Irene mentioned, that I will go into the pilot that UNIDO and SIM conducted at the beginning of the year in Ghana. It was based on this methodology, and we did it on the cocoa supply chain in Ghana. So in the beginning of the year,
we don't hear you, Nithya.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you, but in English. I wonder if the translation is working. Please, Amelia.
Sí.
Okay, go on, Nithya.
Okay. So in the beginning of this year, we started a pilot of this methodology, application of this methodology for the Ghanaian cocoa supply chain. For this methodology, we mapped a conventional and a certified supply chain, a cocoa supply chain, coming from Ghana. So it included actors starting from farm level all the way to a retailer in Europe. So it is very important to involve as many key stakeholders as possible during this pilot, which we did. Along the way, we also validated the value chain that we had mapped during the initial research phase to understand how the sector works. And we also identified all the issues that different stakeholders face during their normal operational work. What is really important during this fact-finding mission is that we have a representative from each actor in the supply chain. So if we have a farmer, a representative, or a cooperative representative, an exporter, a retailer, this is essentially to get a wider grasp of the issues and how we can implement blockchain in the entire sector within that country. We also prepared questionnaires based on the categories that Irene had mentioned. This was customized for each actor, so which is relevant for those actors and their activities, revolving around topics of data availability, transactions, IT savviness, etc. Next slide. Yeah. So during this pilot, we visited Ghana, and we interviewed 6 farmers, a cooperative, a purchasing clerk, the marketing company, a quality control company, and regulatory bodies. To begin with, I want to give you an insight into how the Ghanaian cocoa supply chain works. Traditionally, you would have farmer to the retailer with the exporter or the processor in between. But what makes Ghana really unique is that they have an overarching governmental organization called Cocoa Board, which governs the whole cocoa supply chain. So they not only fix the market price for cocoa in Ghana, so all cocoa beans have to be passed through Cocoa Board, but they also have specific responsibilities for the supply chain, like giving seeds to the farmers, of teaching them how to, for good agricultural practices. They even collect cocoa beans and do quality inspections for export. And Cocoa Board has various subsidiaries across to to carry out these different responsibilities. So one of the subsidiaries is the cocoa marketing company, which collects, it's essentially a warehouse at the port, and they collect all the cocoa beans from different parts of the country. They do quality inspections by another company called Cocoa Quality Control Company. They are also licensed individuals or organizations, that is the purchasing clerk or the trading station. So only if you are licensed, you are allowed to buy cocoa beans from farmers. So overall, the flow of a cocoa bean would be that the farmer or the cooperative produce these beans. The purchasing clerk and the trading stations buy all the cocoa beans from different farmers. They collect it and then they transfer it to the CMC or the warehouse at the port. The QCC would do a quality check on the cocoa beans, and then this is sold to a processor, an exporter, and then downstream for export. So we did a questionnaire, and we interviewed an equal representative from each of these actors in the supply chain. So going back to the three main questions that we wanted to answer coming into this this project with this pilot, we wanted to see if this value chain even needed blockchain. So we did, based on desk research and interviews with stakeholders, we identified that the cocoa supply chain in Ghana does have a broad range of sustainability issues, ranging from economic issues, social or environmental issues. They also had inefficiencies and issues with the inventory management, especially in the last mile between the farmer and the purchasing clerk, as most of it is, most of the farmers are smallholders in rural areas, and all of it is based on a paper transaction, or sometimes maybe even no transaction, paper trail. Payments are generally late. So all of these findings showed that the cocoa value chain would benefit from an application such as blockchain. The next question is that if this value chain is ready for blockchain. As I said before, that one of the main findings during this pilot was that most of the data that is from the farmer to the warehouse, the CMC at the port, is all paper-based. So the probability of data missing or is really high, and most of the information is through cache. So this shows that in order to go on a blockchain, this has to be digitalized in some way. On the good side, we also saw that COCOBOT, the government organization, is moving towards a new digital traceability system so that all information in the sector is transferred into a digital platform. This would give us a great opportunity to implement a blockchain. Lastly, what would it take to implement the blockchain? It is the most important to have everything digitalized, so transferring all the paper-based transactions to a digital platform, whether it's through a mobile phone or through a computer or a very advanced IT system. And crucial is to get the first mile involved, so the farmers and the purchasing clerks. Of course, during this whole pilot, we learned a lot. And I want to present some of the main lessons we learned during this pilot. It is very crucial to understand the government's role and other institutions' roles in that supply chain. For example, in Ghana, how COCOBOT is so important and is a regulatory body in the whole supply chain. So if it is in if you're doing a pilot in any other country, assessment in any other country, it is important to see if these kind of organizations or other organizations play such a vital role. Generally, at least the Ghanaian pilot was, we took 5 days to do. So we saw that this was sufficient time as long as we have a representative from each type of actor. So if we have different types of farmers, we have a representative of a big farmer, a smallholder, an intermediary, a trader, an exporter. So we need different stakeholders during the fact-finding mission. we need to involve also downstream stakeholders that are exporters or retailers based in the exporting countries. It is very crucial to involve them at a very early stage. And this also helps us identify the operational problems that they have, the experience during the movement of the product. Of course, we also need to identify the operational problems that are faced by the upstream actors, from the farmers and the intermediaries. It is also important to know what if there are any general trends in the country, like we saw in Ghana, that Cocoa Board is trying to digitalize the whole the supply chain. So if each country is having similar trends. Yeah, so these were the main lessons we learned, and I would like to hand over to Juan Pablo.
Sí, thank you, Suri. Gracias, continuaré en español. Yo creo que fue una explicación breve sobre lo que es blockchain, cuáles son los beneficios de tener un sistema blockchain y sobre todo un esbozo sobre la metodología que tenemos desarrollada en la UNIDO para determinar si una industria pues se puede beneficiar de blockchain, si está preparada para blockchain. Y la última pregunta que responde la metodología es ¿qué se necesita para implementar un sistema de blockchain? Yo creo que es importante recalcar que las tecnologías, como se presentó, es un medio para optimizar ciertos aspectos. Entonces, una primera recomendación es ir hacia resolver un problema o varios problemas. Puede ser, si la intención es resolver un solo problema, puede ser que blockchain no sea la mejor opción para resolver un solo problema de los que sufre la cadena de valor, pero si podemos resolver varios problemas con una misma tecnología, sería un costo más eficiente y una inversión más adecuada para implementar cualquiera que sea la tecnología. La metodología es el primer paso para decidir si se implementa o no se implementa un sistema de blockchain. Después de que se tiene esta respuesta general que la industria lo necesita, está preparada, y estos son los siguientes pasos para tener todo un ecosistema que se comunique entre sí para resolver los problemas. Después de eso viene lo que es la parte de implementación, exactamente la implementación de un sistema de blockchain. La metodología se enfoca en identificar, como se mencionó, los principales actores. En el ejemplo de Ghana, hicimos una selección muy minuciosa de quiénes eran las empresas y los productores que íbamos a visitar conforme a un perfil que pudiera ser representativo. Muchas veces no es necesario ir a todos los productores o tener un gran número de productores, sino tener una representación adecuada, real, sobre las condiciones generales que imperan en diferentes actores. ¿Cuáles son las posibilidades de aplicar la metodología en Perú? Yo creo que uno sería identificar si alguno de los problemas que se pueden resolver con la metodología, con la tecnología blockchain, están presentes en el Perú. Identificar cuáles son las partes interesadas, involucrar a los actores. Como se mencionó, es muy importante que cada actor, hacer una evaluación de cada actor para ver exactamente cuál es el problema que quisieran resolver o que estarían dispuestos a invertir para resolver. Podemos ver que los problemas para el minorista no son los mismos los problemas que para el productor. Y tratar de identificar esta serie de problemas y tener un ecosistema de blockchain adecuado para resolver estos problemas. Fue muy importante contar con los minoristas, es decir, los compradores en Europa, en el caso de Ghana, que definían esas preocupaciones que tiene el consumidor actual de productos de cocoa, de chocolate, sobre medio ambiente, sobre estándares sociales, sobre asegurarse de que no hay niños utilizados en las granjas para la colecta y que cumplen con todas las condiciones mínimas sociales. Entonces es muy importante hacer una evaluación de todos los actores, como lo dije. Cada actor tiene un problema principal y lo que hemos visto es que la tecnología blockchain puede atacar a estos diferentes problemas. Es muy importante que las partes interesadas entiendan qué es blockchain, cómo podría resolver los problemas y qué es lo que se espera de las partes interesadas. Se explicó que es un sistema donde se comparte información, donde se genera información. Entonces, una parte esencial es saber, yo en mi papel en tal lugar de la cadena de valor, si quiero mejorar este problema, si quiero tener el acceso y esa visión general sobre la cadena, estoy dispuesto a compartir y a recibir cierta información de otros actores. Es muy importante también saber si ya se tiene esa información, al menos en papel, y un paso importante es la digitalización de toda esta información para subirlo a la cadena de blockchain. Las posibilidades de los pasos, como mencioné, se hace una vez identificados las partes interesadas, sería una planificación de la misión de identificación y, bueno, se podría tener un proyecto, un documento de 2 a 3 meses, dependiendo del tiempo necesario para la participación de las partes interesadas. Obviamente, el ejercicio que se hizo en Ghana fue antes del confinamiento COVID. Habría que considerar eso también. La siguiente diapositiva. Ustedes respondieron a una pequeña encuesta que se hizo. ¿Cuánto tiempo tardan los clientes en pagarle después de haber entregado su pedido? Ahí podemos ver que 63% tardan más de un mes. Este es un problema que se puede resolver, que se pudiera atacar con blockchain, lo que se explicaba de los contratos inteligentes, que una vez que el pedido llega con las características requeridas, certificadas, digamos, con los sellos en ese pasaporte a su destino, se puede liberar el pago de una manera automática, reduciendo estos pagos y obviamente para los productores, para los que entregan el producto, que muchas veces son los que prefinancian las operaciones, tomando a ellos los costos de este prefinanciamiento, puede ser algo importante, un problema que el blockchain pudiera atacar. ¿Sabe usted dónde termina su producto? La mayoría de los que respondieron tienen alguna idea de qué productos, consumidores finales y países de destino. Muchas veces eso es una información muy importante. Otra de las ventajas en aplicaciones de blockchain es que se puede desarrollar un sistema de reputación de productores, es decir, con los mismos pasaportes de cada actor, se pueden empezar a ganar puntos en donde el producto ha llegado a su destino final, ha sido consumido, ha ganado competencias internacionales. Eso también es muy importante, es una de las opciones que también eventualmente un ecosistema basado en blockchain pudiera solucionar. Si produce un producto certificado, ejemplo orgánico, puede venderse a un precio más alto. Sí, eso es y la segundo mayor respuesta es no siempre. Ese es un problema que se identificó. Muchas veces los agricultores invierten mucho en tener su certificación orgánica, su certificación Fair Trade, pero cuando el mercado o su cadena de suministro está llena ya se satisface esa demanda en ese canal, el producto que es certificado Fair Trade o que es certificado orgánico, pues es vendido a precios como no orgánico y no certificado. Entonces también el tener una visión de por dónde va el producto, cuál es la demanda al final los minoristas, de los consumidores, puede abrir nuevos caminos, nuevas cadenas de suministro para aquellos productores que todavía no venden todo su producto certificado al precio que lo deberían de vender. Esto solamente era un primer acercamiento sobre los problemas que pudiera resolver la cadena, una cadena de suministro basada en blockchain. Como mencioné, puede resolver varios problemas. Existen tecnologías que pueden resolver sistemas de trazabilidad, pero quizá un sistema de trazabilidad no puede resolver el hecho de que se minimicen los tiempos de pago después de haber recibido la mercancía. Por eso es muy importante en nuestra metodología identificar cuáles son los problemas que se van a atacar y cómo se podrían optimizar esos problemas. La siguiente diapositiva. Es una última encuesta que quisiéramos es si le interesaría que su organización sea evaluada para determinar su preparación para adopción de blockchain. Ahí pueden responder. Un aspecto muy importante sobre blockchain es el efecto de red. Como se explicó al principio, el costo de red es bastante significativo. ¿Y a qué me refiero al costo, el beneficio de estar en una red? Por ejemplo, muchos de nosotros tenemos un teléfono móvil, un teléfono celular. Si nosotros fuéramos las únicas personas que tenemos un teléfono móvil, no nos serviría mucho porque no tendríamos a quién llamarle. Esto es a lo que me refiero con el efecto de red. Entre más personas tengan un teléfono móvil, vamos a tener más beneficio de tener eso. Es algo similar que pasa con blockchain. Si más personas dentro de una cadena, dentro de un actor, tienen sus datos dentro de una cadena blockchain, va a ser mayor el beneficio. Y obviamente las opciones que uno puede hacer con todos estos datos, dependiendo de su accesibilidad, son inmensas. Se puede combinar con otras tecnologías como Big Data, como computación en la nube para hacer análisis más exhaustivos. Un ejemplo es la saturación de puertos de embarque. Se puede determinar si uno tuviera toda esta información en un sistema, se pudiera determinar y se combina con datos sobre densidad de lluvia, sobre cosechas, se podría determinar y prever saturación en puertos de embarque para evitar esos cuellos de botella que muchas veces suceden, que son perjudiciales para la cadena, es decir, tener almacenado en un puerto en espera que sea llevado, se podrían eficientizar estos sistemas teniendo toda la información. Siguiente, yo creo que, bueno, la respuesta es grandemente, hay cierto interés. Nosotros en la UNIDO tenemos el proyecto de GQSP en Perú, y bueno, yo creo que podría ser una oportunidad para poder aplicar esta metodología y poder avanzar o llevar en pasos sólidos para la implementación de nuevas tecnologías de la cuarta revolución industrial. Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Juan Pablo. Bueno, con el fin de la exposición pasamos a la sección de preguntas y respuestas. Tenemos unas preguntas muy interesantes que vamos a responder. De antemano, disculpamos por no responderlas todas las que vengan por el tiempo. Pediría a las expositoras, por favor, si pudieran prender sus videos para tenerlas, y ustedes elijan quién va a responder. También pediría me confirmen las expositoras que están escuchando bien la traducción al inglés para saber que pueden responder. ¿no? Sí, me confirman, por favor, Leontien, que escuchas la traducción en inglés adecuadamente. Perfecto. Muchas gracias. Ok, hay dos preguntas sobre Ghana, que les agradeceré si pudieran respondernos. Van directamente. Respecto al trabajo que han realizado o están realizando en Ghana, preguntan si es que ya en Ghana existían experiencias previas de blockchain y si de ser afirmativa la respuesta, cómo esto influyó en la investigación que realizaron. Y otra pregunta relacionada con Ghana es si pudieran compartirnos algunos resultados o hallazgos de este proceso, adicionalmente a los aprendizajes que ustedes han identificado.
You want me to, I can respond the part of the first question sobre si había sistemas de blockchain en Ghana. Los resultados de la visita que se hizo no identificaron ninguna aplicación tangible de blockchain. Una parte de los involucrados a nivel de las diferentes instituciones desconocía la tecnología. Las partes más conectadas a mercados en donde sus compradores tienen un sistema de trazabilidad sí conocían algo de blockchain, pero en lo que fue la misión de identificación no nos topamos con ninguna aplicación tangible de blockchain. Había mucho interés para aquellos que habían escuchado sobre la tecnología, pero también fue muy interesante saber que muchas veces la tecnología no ha penetrado a los niveles, a los diferentes niveles de gobierno, de instituciones y de productores. Es por esto que es muy importante también tener una sensibilización de qué es la tecnología y qué se puede hacer con la tecnología para hacer ese salto leapfrog en la solución de los problemas.
Y respecto a los resultados que se puedan comentar.
Sí, los resultados ahí se compartieron una diapositiva sobre algunos resultados. Puedo repetir algunos, no nada más las lecciones aprendidas. Los hallazgos generales es que se vieron bastante oportunidad para solucionar.
Sí, es la diapo presentada, creo, la que está ahorita en pantalla.
Sí, esas son las lecciones. Hay otra sobre los hallazgos. Creo que sí es la anterior. No, antes. Hallazgos generales. Ahí la cadena de valor necesita blockchain. En general, sí. Se identificaron problemas que blockchain puede solucionar. Estos problemas son riesgos. Hay riesgos de sostenibilidad, económicos, sociales, medioambientales. Un problema que también resurgió fue el hecho que los compradores de cacao están preocupados sobre si la prima adicional que pagan por el cacao orgánico o el cacao certificado Fair Trade, si esa prima adicional realmente llega a los productores. Eso también es algo que el blockchain pudiera, un ecosistema de blockchain pudiera abordar. Hay ineficiencias en la gestión de inventarios. Hay una cierta trazabilidad no completa, como se mencionó, hay una trazabilidad en papel. Hay verificaciones de calidad repetidas durante lo largo de la cadena de valor. es algo que se pudiera reducir para eficientizar el tiempo en estas verificaciones de calidad. Es decir, el sistema blockchain puede también reducir el costo de verificación. El costo de verificación en donde si el producto llega ya y en su pasaporte, digamos, viene el sello de que cumple con la calidad, cumple con la humedad, cumple con el tamaño, se puede confiar en este pasaporte sin necesidad de otra vez hacer esos análisis que llevan tiempo y llevan costo. ¿Está lista la cadena de valor para blockchain? Hay unas partes que sí, hay otras partes que no. Se debe trabajar en los sistemas base, es decir, un sistema de trazabilidad, alargar el sistema de trazabilidad que abarque a los diferentes actores, sobre todo en áreas pequeñas. Hay pagos en efectivo, se maneja mucho pago en efectivo. También el sistema un ecosistema de blockchain puede disminuir los pagos en efectivo, es decir, mejorar las transferencias electrónicas por medio de los contratos inteligentes. Esto también es un riesgo, los pagos en efectivo para los que colectan los sacos de cacao. Es un riesgo porque tienen que llevar bastante dinero en efectivo y son muchas veces víctimas de asaltos de inseguridad por la cantidad de dinero que llevan. Un sistema de blockchain puede ser nada más registrarlo con un dispositivo móvil, un teléfono, y los pagos van directamente a la cuenta de los productores sin necesidad de tener esos riesgos en cuanto a temor a ser asaltado o robado. Estos son algunos de los hallazgos. Está lista la cadena. Se puede trabajar, se debe de trabajar en varios puntos antes de hacer una implementación. Lo que la metodología también busca es buscar esos actores en donde se puede hacer una prueba piloto. Una prueba piloto es decir que son actores que están conectados entre sí, es decir, realmente seguir el producto desde el productor hasta el supermercado y ahí construir la carretera de datos que es el blockchain y que estos actores que hemos visitado se suban a la carretera, usen la carretera, que es decir, suban sus datos al sistema de blockchain y de ahí atraer a más productores, porque la carretera, como ustedes saben, si se construye una carretera, bueno, empiezan a usarla aquellos que tienen las capacidades para usarla, hay aquellos que tienen un carro, aquellos que saben manejar. Es algo similar en blockchain. Se tiene la carretera, se hace una carretera para que la usen aquellos que están mejor preparados y los demás que están viendo la carretera van a tener van a ser motivados sí, yo quiero usar esa carretera porque veo que hay una optimización en llegar hasta el otro lado de donde se quiere llegar. Sí.
Muchas gracias, Juan Pablo.
No sé si Leontien o Irene quisieran agregar algo sobre...
Yes, I think another interesting point that was found out is that has to do with sustainability, with responsible products, that at the consumer end there is a lot of unclarity about what happens with premiums paid for certified products. And that was also clear that, you know, if there can be more clarity about it by sharing data about how the premiums are allocated and distributed and what part of it comes, you know, reaches the farmers to really work on improvements. And that would really be a benefit. And also an important point that we saw coming back for several actors was the need for loans to pre-finance crops and harvests. And in many cases, you need to prove towards the, you know, the financial institution or the party who maybe wants to give a loan, that you are a trustworthy debtor or debtor, or what you call that, so that you can pay back the money later. So you need to build up a track record of harvest and how you manage your business actually. And that is also something that can be done, you know, using blockchain to share that kind of information that will increase trust. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Irene. Pasando a una siguiente pregunta, tenemos varias preguntas relacionadas con el mismo tema, que es, y lo presento a los expositores, ¿qué condiciones o precondiciones o requisitos son necesarios en una cadena, ya sea en términos de información, en temas tecnológicos, culturales, organizativos, para que sea aplicable a una metodología blockchain?
I can give a
Leontien.
I can give a first answer. I think, yeah, because we've assessed so many supply chains. I think first and foremost, if you look at setting up a traceability system, so going, I would say, almost to radical transparency on who the actors are, the products traveling through the supply chain. There needs to be a clear win for everybody to make a supply chain transparent. Now, what we see is that there are many supply chains where there are actors in the chain that not necessarily add value to the product, but maybe own the product at a certain moment in time, but that don't even have the product at their premises. They're just traders in between. If you have one or multiple traders in large supply chains and they also are powerful, they have a large margin that they make by trading that product, they often don't have necessarily a win for them in there if they create transparency, because if there's no added value to the product, it's difficult to, as an actor that they bring to the product, it's difficult. So I think it needs to be very clear from the supply chain that there can be a clear win. And what you often see now is that the largest margins are often at the last mile, so to say. Much more than at the first mile, and there you need to have a clear understanding how that supply chain is organized. In terms of readiness on the IT side, it actually doesn't really matter, like I said before, because you can digitize information, and if any computer can have access to it. I mean, our mobile phones nowadays have more computing power than the computers that set a man on the moon. So if you have a smartphone, you can access such a network. And for instance, here in the Netherlands, all eggs sold here in the Netherlands, they go through a blockchain. Farmers just send a WhatsApp or a text message to the blockchain, and then a product passport is started. So in terms of IT readiness, there is actually less of a burden than the more centralized systems, because those require often full-fledged interfaces with IT systems to connect to it.
Muchas gracias. ¿Alguien quiere complementar? Irene, Nithya, si quisiera tal vez complementar alguna parte, o pasamos a la siguiente pregunta. Ya, pasamos. Una pregunta también que tenemos es, de su experiencia, ¿no? en varias cadenas, ¿la aplicación del blockchain da un mayor valor económico sobre el precio de un producto? ¿El mercado reconoce esta herramienta y le da valor?
I can maybe give an first answer to that, but I'm sure my other colleagues would have other additional answers as well. I think there is, what we actually see is most of our blockchain projects started with retailers and brands that wanted to have a product with the story for their consumers. But what we actually see is that there is much more interest in what we call the kind of the supply chain directors, the large trader producers in supply chains, to create transparency and traceability, because you see that there is a differentiation coming very strongly of products where you say this is orange juice with all the associated data and the provenance or where it has been made under which circumstances. And this is the orange juice that doesn't have it, that also doesn't have a premium. So we see that there's an increase in uptake in actually having this differentiation for the consumer about the products with or without provenance information and transparency. One of the, what we've actually done with the orange juice is even try to minimize the distance between consumers and producers by using blockchain technology. Because if the actors are known, you can also connect them. So consumers have mobile phones and farmers or people working on farms have mobile phones. So with the orange juice case, we allowed consumers to send a question or a like or a picture of them with the product to the farmers and the plantations, which was a very nice first start to create that connection. What we're experimenting now actually is with a large bank called the Rabobank to even look at the possibility, and we've done a large consumer research for consumers to decide themselves that they want to give a premium, kind of a tip to farmer, where that premium can be paid then directly to farmers if consumers want that. So you really can create this much closer connection and have a better understanding of where products are made and under which circumstances. And that's an upcoming trend we see throughout retail land.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias. Juan Pablo.
Sí, yo creo que el mercado reconoce la validez de la información. El mercado quiere estar seguro que la información es verdadera y está validada de lo que compran. Y yo creo que hay que diferenciar. Obviamente hay tendencias en donde el consumidor en los países desarrollados están más preocupados por cómo es que el producto se hace, si está afectando el medio ambiente, si están usando niños para su elaboración, si están, aparte de todo lo normal que es la inocuidad del alimento, y están dispuestos a pagar más para tener esa información en la palma de su mano, en su teléfono móvil. Entonces lo que nosotros vemos es, ya hay una tendencia de ver el valor económico sobre los diferentes certificados de inocuidad sociales, ambientales, y también sobre la veracidad de la información. Y blockchain, como es un libro, una base de datos inmutable, da esa veracidad.
Muchas gracias, Juan Pablo. Pasando a la siguiente pregunta, también hay una pregunta, vamos a ver si nuestras expertas las pueden responder. La inocuidad debe ser garantizada en todos los puntos de la cadena, pero no todos los puntos se certifica la inocuidad. La pregunta es, ¿qué pasa cuando en una cadena determinada la inocuidad se detecta al final, pero los certificados que la avalan son ingresados por el productor, o sea, en unos eslabones iniciales, ¿no? ¿Cómo se hace consistencia? Y también, otra pregunta, si el ingreso de datos es con formulario, si no lo necesitan, ¿cómo se agrupa la información por cada tema o eslabón de la cadena?
Leontien, quizás you may have more insight on the certification.
So if I understand it correctly, the question is if data is collected, there can be different results added to the blockchain from different actors that contradict each other. Of course, that can happen. The example of food safety test done at the end of the supply chain. So if there's a processor or a factory somewhere and it works with raw materials, then the food safety can be, certification can be at the processing level. That is indeed correct. And that is one of the things where you see also a transformation in terms of management of supply chains and monitoring on batch level of products going through the supply chain. To give a very concrete example, when we worked with large volumes of bananas coming from Colombia, there was a very big focus on reducing food waste, because a lot of the percentage of the bananas would not go and get into the store, or would not be at the right quality when they were in the store. So the whole focus was on the first mile and the issues that might be there. But once we started really testing and monitoring quality from the first mile all the way until shipping, actually there were not many issues there. And we actually decided to do lab tests in the country of origin more than in the country where the bananas were sold. But through that system, we actually found out that the last mile, so when the bananas were in the distribution center after the ripener, and just before they were in the stores, they were stored outside or in a waiting portal for the supermarkets. And there was when a lot of the food waste actually happens. And after that, the quality actually decreased tremendously. So when tests were done, when they were in the store, they were it didn't give very good results. While almost all actors in the supply chain were certain that the issues came from the first mile in the beginning of the supply chain. So I think being able to share quality-related data can bring some new insights into supply chains. One of the core examples also is, for instance, the maintenance of a cold chain. If you talk about fresh fish or meat, and to have the results of whether the cold chain has been broken, to share that, or how much the temperature went up and down, to share that with the actors in the supply chain, so they can adjust to that. I think that is where we've seen quite interesting parts. And I think what nowadays often is a lot of difficulty, especially for the work we do at SIM. So we have many people working that calling suppliers around the clock to find out where products are made. If you have a chain of custody standard, so a certification that you have to have at each step of the supply chain, that's often a lot of work to find it out for retailers or for the end seller, so to say, if that is really correct. And I think the chain of custody, collecting the chain of custody information is also is very good to use a traceability system for that. I hope that answered maybe the question.
Sí. Juan Pablo, creo que tenías algo para comentar.
No, simplemente con el blockchain son los datos que se pueden ingresar a lo largo de toda la cadena de suministro, y es el mismo sistema determina qué tipo de datos son los que se quieren ingresar y que se quieren monitorear. Uno de esos es la temperatura, lo que mencionó Leontien, es la cadena fría. Si se detecta que hay un cambio en la temperatura, se puede determinar que ahí es donde hubo un problema crítico, y identificar más puntualmente dónde viene el problema. Gracias.
Listo. Bueno, tenemos preguntas sobre temas de costos, pero que creo que eso es muy variable y dependiendo de cada situación encontrada, ¿no? Como para brindar opinión en este momento. Otros temas también que están un poquito alejados de la temática, y yo diría por el tiempo también, para cerrar, una pregunta para UNIDO. También creo que es bueno ayudar a dar las palabras finales. Preguntan, en el caso del cacao, ¿quiénes consideran que serían los principales actores clave mínimos para hacer un buen análisis en el caso del Perú? en el caso blockchain Cacao Perú. Y también preguntan si UNIDO se puede iniciar con UNIDO una experiencia piloto con cooperativa y cliente en Europa.
Gracias. Sí, los principales actores serían ver todo a lo largo de la cadena de valor, tener al menos un involucrado en esa cadena de suministro. Es decir, el productor, después el del acopio, después no sé, el laboratorio que hace los análisis de eso, el transportista, y el comprador en el destino, porque para ver cómo es que la tecnología puede atacar los diferentes problemas de los diferentes actores. O sea, lo ideal es tener a todos los actores de una cadena de suministro que estén dispuestos, que entiendan qué es lo que hay, qué es lo que ellos van a sacar del sistema y qué es lo que ellos deben de poner en el sistema para que el sistema funcione. Y esa es una de las condiciones, digamos, que nosotros nos ponemos a implementar la metodología, es ver también cuáles son las necesidades en el lado del supermercado en Europa o en eso, porque no es que esto nace en el lado productor o en el lado que vende, sino eso debe nacer en todo un clúster de esta cadena de suministro, en donde cada actor sabe qué puede tener de beneficio y qué es lo que necesita poner. Entonces, eso es lo que nosotros recomendamos. Creo que respondí o me faltó algo.
No, ha respondido porque ha respondido indirectamente, dice que se puede iniciar con una cooperativa y cliente. Faltarían más actores, ¿no? Para poder tener una buena evaluación. Aunque, claro, estos primeros actores serían como que los que podrían impulsar la participación del resto en alguna medida. Bueno, con esto doy pie ya para cerrar el evento, las palabras finales del señor Juan Pablo Dávila, representante de UNIDO.
Gracias, agradezco a todos los participantes, especialmente a Leontien, Irene, Nithya. Muchas gracias por su cooperación en este webinar. Nosotros en la UNIDO, como mencionamos, estamos promoviendo y apoyando a nuestros países miembros, del cual Perú es país miembro, a tener una mejor sensibilización sobre lo que pueden hacer este tipo de tecnologías y a darles un acompañamiento en la medida de lo posible para mejorar los suministros, mejorar la calidad de los productos. Y obviamente tenemos un programa y un proyecto en el Perú, el GQSP, en el cual estamos trabajando sobre estas áreas. Y bueno, yo creo que de aquí podríamos empezar a explorar más a detalle cómo podríamos implementar esta metodología e involucrar a los diferentes actores. Esto con la respuesta de las encuestas que tuvimos. Y por último, muchísimas gracias por su tiempo. Gracias igualmente al personal de SIM por esta tan valiosa exposición.
Muchas gracias, Juan Pablo. Finalmente, a nombre del Programa Global de Calidad y Estándares de la UNIDO, que cuenta con la cooperación, con el financiamiento de la cooperación suiza a través de SECO, y su proyecto en Perú, fortaleciendo la calidad en café y cacao en el Perú, que tiene como contraparte al Ministerio de la Producción y como contraparte técnica al INACAL. También agradecemos la muy interesante participación de los expositoras y nos despedimos. Muchas gracias por participar y aquí están nuestras redes para que nos sigan y en las próximas horas o mañana estaremos enviándoles un correo indicándoles dónde pueden acceder al video y a los materiales de la presentación. Muy buenos días para los participantes en Perú.